Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the greatest podcast on the internet. Yes, everybody. Welcome back to the next episode of What's on Your Workbench. I am Chili. With me, as always, from across the globe is Andrew. Say hi, Andrew.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, however you are receiving this. It's good to be back. We've had a bit of a break, although there won't be a break in the schedule, so I don't know why I'm bringing it up, but I always feel it's good to notice that it's been a couple of weeks since we've chatted, which is always a bit of a thing, because it's like, I wonder if we've skipped a few projects, which I don't think we have, judging from what I've been watching of your work on Facebook. It looks like that last project of yours took up quite a bit of time and it turned out absolutely beautiful. Thank you. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later, but how have you been?
I've been good. How about you?
Yeah, doing good. I've knocked out some of that renovations around the house, so now back in full project mode, which is always good, because I always sit there and go, oh, what am I going to talk about this week? I don't have anything on my workbench. And then I look over on my workbench and there's like 3 projects in the middle of going. So there's always something going on at this house, and they're usually quite a bit different from one to the other. So yeah, no, I'm interested to hear what you've been up to, because I feel like it's been a while. So how you been doing apart from that?
There's been a lot of things. There's been a lot of things across the workbench in the past couple weeks, but most importantly, at the time being, what's on your workbench?
Well, I'm going to take you on a journey, as most often is the case with my projects. This one kind of sat around in my head. It's probably about August, September, October last year, and whenever I get to Christmas, I'm always like, what do I get my wife for Christmas? You know, because it's a competition, right? You've got to always give the better present than what they give you, because that's how you win marriage, right? Like, obviously. And so I'm kidding, everyone. Kidding, sort of. And so I always try and make something, because usually, you know, especially now we've bought a house, you know, we don't have a huge amount of money to just kind of throw at jewelry like I used to do in the olden days, which was much simpler. But my wife was aiming to better her health in multiple ways, start a diet, start some exercise. And I came across a project from Simone Giertz, I think it is. She's used to make the crappy robots where, you know, it was just dumb robots, kind of more as an art piece than an actual functioning robot, and was kind of hilarious to watch. And she kind of pivoted to making more serious projects. And one of the ones she made, and she ended up putting it on a Kickstarter, was a 365-day calendar. And what that is it's basically a row of switches and lights. And so you can set yourself a goal every day of like, I'm going to floss my teeth, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to be on my diet. And every day that you do the right thing, you can click a button, and then you get that immediate feedback. It lights up. And then you can look back on your progress over the year, and you can see, you know, whether you've been on target. Like your target might be once every second day, once a week, and you can kind of have a visual reference to see, oh, I've been doing well, I need to keep going. And so I decided to make one of those. As you alluded to before the podcast, it's a bit of a logistical nightmare, because her original prototype was made with toggle switches. So she had 365 toggle switches, all soldered up, sorted. We'll get into that in a second. And she then had just one light at the top. So basically, if you had a whole month, you'd get the reward of having a light go off at the top. She then pivoted in her Kickstarter to, because obviously doing that on a mass scale just isn't practical at all. You know, hand soldering 365 switches is crazy. That's what I did. And so basically she then pivoted to like a printed board, and it had just kind of like switch, kind of like a keyboard, where it just had like a copper board that had been etched. And that's what it ended up being like. And it was an absolutely beautiful piece of art. But I really like the aesthetic of those toggle switches and the ability to just kind of click, 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 every morning when you've done your exercise or whatever you've done. So I went down this path of like, okay, well, how am I going to make this? I mean, surely it's not that difficult to get 365 toggle switches. Well, turns out if you just go to a local store and buy them, they're like $1 each or, 75 cents each. And you're like, oh, that's not too bad if you're buying one or two. But when you're buying 365 of them, it adds up very quickly. And like I said, it wasn't meant to be an expensive project. So I ended up going to AliExpress, good old Chinese company, and I ordered 365 switches. I think I ordered like 370 switches or something because I knew that some would break and they wouldn't all be perfect. But the problem was that they took a lot longer to arrive. I mean, with the pandemic going on and all those delays, I can't remember when I ordered them, but I think it took 2-3 months for them to get here. And so as I got to the actual cutoff date, which is obviously Christmas Eve, I was starting to run out of time. So there was also some other hiccups with ordering parts. I think I ordered, all the LEDs required for it, but they never actually showed. So then I had to just go to the local store and pick up LEDs. And apparently they only stock 40 of the correct sized LEDs, and I didn't want to run around town. So what I ended up deciding to do was, kind of throw as much as I could on together for the night for Christmas Eve. So she could open up the present, she could turn some lights on, but I think at that point I only had 30 LEDs in it or something. But here, for those of you that are watching, I'll show you kind of what it looks like.
Holy moly.
So for those of you that can't see, imagine, what would this be? It's about 1 foot by 2 feet piece of stainless steel. In that stainless steel, imagine 12 rows of 30 holes. And then in each one of them, a toggle switch. And then adjacent to that is another hole for an LED. And so you can basically go along and you can click it and you get this really satisfying click. But yeah, so a lot of lessons learned on this project. I have this issue in my head where I'm like, oh, it won't be that bad. How hard could it be? Yeah, this one that's just, even if you do the simple math of like, oh, if it only takes a minute to solder up a switch and a light switch, that's 365 minutes, which is what, 6 hours? Assuming you can get the resources. So that is what I'm on. So what I've basically been doing is every couple of months, I go and buy a bunch of LEDs and I solder them in. And so I'm at the point of, I actually fell a little bit behind. So I'm actually doing the rest of May and June and maybe a little bit of July, depending on how my LED stocks go. But yeah, and so if you want to look at the back.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, I guess caveats here, I am not an electrician. I am not an electronics guru at all. So if you are inclined to OCD electronics, don't look at this. You will probably have a heart attack. But yeah, so it's all 12 volt LED setup. Yeah, basically it's all soldered. I couldn't really figure out how to do initially to do the copper wire. So I used old copper wire that I stripped out and ended up going and buying some special copper wire. But yeah, each of those is a 3mm LED to a resistor, and then each of that is to a toggle switch, and then that's all in parallel. So yeah, it takes to do about 60, it's probably about 3 or 4 hours. I've kind of noticed. I kind of sit there and I solder together a whole bunch of LEDs and resistors, and then I go in and install them. So and then being AliExpress switches, they don't all work, so then I have to go and pull them out. So there's about 3 or 4 red taped for me to go in and fix. But yeah, so that's what's on my workbench at the moment. It's kind of one of those therapeutic processes though. You kind of just put some music on and just work your way along. And when I first started, I was using an old soldering iron that I inherited from my brother 20 years ago. He's an electrician, so he had one for hobby work, and then he moved on to actual proper equipment. And so I had this old really nasty thing that just wasn't working. And so a couple of things that I did to enhance my process was I actually ended up going and buying a proper, well, I wouldn't say proper, but a much more refined soldering iron, which has temperature control. I went and bought some proper flux and things like that. The solder I was using was fine, but yeah, so it's been a bit of a learning process in learning that you've got to get the right temperatures in place for that solder to stick, and things like that. But yeah, so that's what I've been working on. Yeah, it's been a process, but it's actually quite a funky thing when you look at it in the end, and it just hangs on the wall. And I've actually got it hooked up to like kind of an automatic timer. So you kind of wake up in the morning, you see it all lit up, and then it turns off after a couple of hours, and similar thing at night. But yeah,
it looks like something out of like a World War II bomber. Like it isn't. I don't know if you've ever seen like in the cockpit, and the bomb controls of like a B-17 Flying Fortress. It's insane. Like you're like, people were trained in a short period of time to know what these switches do. Baloney. They were just flying over Germany, hitting buttons, hoping something good happened. Like
it always. I don't know if you've ever seen the short film Lifted by Pixar, where there's a bunch of aliens trying to lift up a body, like kind of that thing. And there's a whole desk full of switches, and at the end he's just getting so frustrated. That's what it always reminds me of when I did that. But I did have a couple questions for you, Chili. Doing this, I was using stainless steel. I was originally hoping to use aluminium or a thicker aluminum, depending on where you're from. But I ended up going with stainless steel because that was kind of available at the local hardware store. And when I went to actually drill all those holes, I had some issues, right? So I wasn't meant to be bent. So you can see it's got this nice kind of concave curve that looks like it's meant to be there. Yeah, that wasn't meant to be there. And I had a center punch. And actually for Christmas, I got one of the automatic center punches, which is probably what I should have been using. But I just kind of had a manual one that I tapped with a hammer. Now, as I tapped it, it basically forced that curve into the metal. So I guess my question for you, I mean, you've done a lot more work with metal, is there a way, I mean, obviously I had like a laser cutter or something like that, it would be absolutely piece of cake to do this kind of thing, but I don't. So I kind of went along with a center punch. Would have an automatic punch, kind of just like those spring loaded punches, would have that been a better process to not get that bend in the metal? Or how, like, was that just, I mean, I assume it was just because I was hammering on it too much and it just basically caused that bend.
Yeah. So you were creating expansion points in the metal as you went. That's why it has that. Plus, I'm guessing what you were hammering on wasn't quite hard enough. Like you really should have been on a metal plate.
Okay.
Because if you're on like wood, it's going to have some give to it, and it's going to allow that metal to expand on the underside as you hammer.
Yep.
Even that little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I was hammering on wood.
So doing it, 1, on a metal plate, 2, use an automatic punch. The caveat to that is, since it's stainless, you need to make sure you're using a punch that is tool hardened or stainless itself.
Yep.
That's a bear. Stainless is a lot of fun. There's some real intricacies to it.
I
may not know diving.
I learned that lesson of
what kind of drill bits did you use for that?
Several.
Your wood ones?
No, I think they were just general purpose ones. I did end up going and buying a proper one once I went in there. It wasn't my wood bits. I don't have a huge selection of dedicated wood bits, but yeah, just the general purpose was what I started with. And I started small and kind of worked my way up. And kind of once the first 40 or so holes were pretty rough, but then I kind of figured out the correct sizing to start off with and work my way through. But yeah, like just that in itself took like a week or so of just getting in and trying to drill a few more holes, and then going in and drilling a few more holes, and yeah. Yeah, it's like looking back and going, oh, why don't I just use a piece of acrylic or something? Like, but no, and then I've actually, yeah, it's
so the best thing to use drill bit wise on that, whenever you're doing really any kind of metal, um, even low carbon, soft steel, the best thing to use is they make cobalt tipped drill bits.
okay.
Those are made for going through metal.
Yep.
Now you can ruin them pretty easily, because to drill through metal, you have to drop your speed down,
Okay.
and keep keep a fluid like a cutting oil,
Fluid. Yep.
or something like that on it, so that you don't overheat the drill bit.
Yeah.
That heat from drilling will also warp the metal.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely had a bit of that. If you have a look at the front face of it, you can see heat effects because I let it get too hot. So definitely
so
a lot of lessons on this one.
I probably, depending on, you said those the holes for the lights were 3 mil, right?
Yeah, I think it was. I think they were 4 mil hole for the switches, and because
and how big were the holes for the switches?
I think they were the same. Let me have a look here. It's each of the LEDs has a mounting. I don't know if you can see that. So whatever that was, I think it was 1/4 of an inch. Yeah, it looks about 3/8, quarter, something like that. But
yeah, so something that size, I probably would just use a cobalt drill bit and do it in a single pass. If you're going larger than that, what I prefer to do is punch an initial hole, with a cobalt drill bit, and then I'll change to a step bit.
Yeah.
And use that to expand out my hole. That's usually the cleanest way.
Yeah. For those of you that can see, those are the step bits, and these are awesome.
These are glorious.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that when you start off, as any kind of maker, you just kind of get that generic drill kit, and you're like, oh, yeah, this will do. And then once you kind of work your way through, then you start going, maybe I should be using the correct bits. And that's when you start delving into drill bits, and you go, wow, this is expensive. But you also go, it's, you buy the right bits, and it makes a world of difference. And I know that was one thing that I learned pretty early on was, these kind of bits exist, and for cutting sheet metal or any thin sheet, they're really good for. Forstner bits, spade bits, there's a million different bits out there, and each of them do their job very well. Like most tools, use the right tool and it helps you out immensely.
So I'm curious, how often did you have to resilver your soldering iron as you were doing this?
It kind of varies on which step I'm doing. When I'm just kind of doing the resistor to the LED, not very often. But again, this was the first time I've ever used flux fluid at all, and that's kind of a life changer. And then the other thing was being able to get the soldering iron up hot enough. I think all the previous soldering irons I had, they just weren't getting up to that temperature. And once you hit that critical temperature, the solder just goes straight onto the whatever you're trying to solder, and it'll connect and just works great. And I look at some of my soldering compared to the first attempts, and it's just a different world. And it's not that expensive, those cheap ones, at least in Australia, they cost, $15-20. And I think I picked up this one for like $40-50. So it wasn't a huge investment, but it made a world of difference to my sanity. Well, as much as it questionably was, but so I'm using quite a bit of solder on it, just because I'm not a perfect, I'm not definitely an expert in it. So I'm just kind of making sure it's secure as possible, and making sure it works. But so far it's doing well.
That's a really great project for for honing a skill, for honing those soldering skills. That kind of project with that, amount of repetition, like you're gonna notice a massive difference in that last solder joint from the first one.
Yeah, and even just in the drilling holes, the first holes compared to the holes at the end work very different.
I'm gonna have a soldering project of my own here. My sister, when she lived in Hawaii, one of her friends and roommates was a beauty contestant.
Okay.
And she has a bunch of crowns, that she won in different contests and stuff. And when my sister left Hawaii, she gave her her very first crown that she ever won, to take with her. And my sister has loved this thing for many, many years, and will randomly like take it out just to like do housework. Like she just puts on this tiara and does housework.
Love it.
Which I love. And she went to take it out the other day from storage, and from moving and stuff, it just it had a couple areas where it broke, and she was like devastated. And I'm gonna solder that one back together for her, do some silver solder. But in the meantime, her friend sent her another one that is enormous. I mean, it's like twice the size of this first one.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen some of that silver solder stuff, and it's just amazing when you watch people do it. It's definitely one of those things that I'd love to try one day once I've got an appropriate project to give it a go. But yeah, this is definitely one of those projects where,
if you want to see some...
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying that, yeah, this is definitely one of those projects that I wish I could do it all again, but I'm never going to have the time and effort to do it all again. I was like, oh, I should make one for myself. It's like, no.
If you want to see some really amazing videos of dudes soldering and stuff, check out on YouTube. There's a bunch of videos from guys who do model building, like from scratch.
Yeah,
like not a kit. Like they take raw materials and build scale replicas. And there was one I saw that this guy was building a replica of a battleship.
Yep.
From scratch. And he was working on the sheet metal, this really tiny, thin sheet metal that was going to create the bow, the very bow of the ship. So it's two complex curves that come together and meet. And it's super tiny and thin. And he just took his, he brushed some flux onto them. He's got them held together like in this intricate tweezer setup. And then he brushes flux on, and then takes an X-Acto knife and shaves off the couple tiny shavings of solder, and then just passes his soldering iron on the back side of the joint, and it just disappears. Like one shot, no problem.
That's awesome. I'm just going to see if I can jump over to my other network. All right, sorry about that. Awesome. Yeah, no, I don't know if you've ever come across a guy on YouTube called ClickSpring. He makes clocks, and he does it all from scratch, and he's replicating the what is it called? The Arithka computer, the one that was found off the coast of like Italy, and it's the computer from 2,000 years ago kind of thing. And and you watch him do a gear or a cog or whatever you want to call it, literally from files he made by hand. And it's just like, like a lot of that's kind of the project he's working on now, but he built like clocks and stuff, and watching him solder it all together is just amazing. And I do have a question though. Okay. We here in Australia, and I believe the rest of the world, call it soldering with an L. And in the US, you refer to it as soldering. Do you know why that is? But I believe it's spelt the same in both places.
Yeah, it's because the L's silent. It's just one of those
One of those
intricacy.
things.
Yeah, it comes from the same place. The word comes from the same, root.
Yeah.
And just through time as language develops, it basically, if there's something that the British pronounce a certain way, then you can be certain that we say it differently.
Of
Just
course.
because we're obstinate.
You have to be different.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was just it's one of those things where it's like, have I been saying it wrong all these years? And then you watch enough YouTube channels and stuff, you're like, oh no, that's just a thing.
Yeah, it's not too terribly off. We just don't
No.
really put a lot of focus on that L.
Yeah.
It's not quite as different as like aluminum versus aluminium. That one's
Yeah. But
obvious.
that one's actually quite interesting because apparently it was originally the guy who invented it or founded or patented, whatever, basically where it started. He wanted to call it aluminum, and then they kind of got together and recalled it aluminium, and then kind of it split back up again. But
Yeah.
fascinating stuff. So enough banter about melting metals. What is on your workbench, Chili?
Well, we have had a number of things fly across the workbench since we last spoke. The largest, as you said, that bench, we got that finished up, and I delivered it actually to the client yesterday.
Yep.
Right, I think yesterday. And yeah, that was great. Turned out pretty well. It's super comfy, which is not always easy to do with a slab wood bench like that. So I was quite happy, and our client was absolutely delighted. So
awesome.
that was great. I had a little bit of downtime between client projects. So one of the big things I did was some tool maintenance. Took the blades out of the planer and got them sharpened up, and a lot of other things that just whenever you get a chance, it's great to be able to make sure your tools are ready to go. So there's a fair bit of tool maintenance, but the thing I really want to talk about is we talked a little bit before about some prototyping, and I am starting off on a new prototype as I'm starting to kind of really look for projects that I can do, on a repeating scale, and a little bit more, retail between these demanding custom projects, things that I can batch. So one of the things I found and gonna try my hand at is, are you familiar with what a cajon is?
No.
Those wood boxes that people sit on and drum on?
Ah, yes.
That is called a cajon.
Huh.
And they're a Peruvian instrument. They come from Peru, and the original instrument, which is what they call a Peruvian cajon, is just a wood box. That's all it is. But many years ago, they got kind of taken to Spain and other parts of Central South America that had the influence of flamenco music. And they started to adapt them by putting guitar strings behind the tamba, which is the striking surface, to give it a snare effect. And they became really, really big in flamenco music. And now you can find hipsters across the world smacking these wood boxes. So I was looking at some of them, and they're crap. They're really poorly made.
I'm shocked.
You can pick them up for as cheap as like $120, and they are a complete plywood box that's poorly made, bad joinery, zero design. And even the really expensive ones, like there's one I found that's like almost $1,400. And when I pulled up pictures of it and I started really zooming in, like there were gaps in the joinery. Like it was bad. And I was like, I can totally do this better. So I'm working on making my first one. I took one of the slabs of elm that came from the tree in our front yard, and it was like 9 a little over 9 foot long, inch and well, it was about 5/4, so an inch and a quarter. Which for those who don't know, when you're dealing with like slab lumber and rough lumber from a mill, it's always talked about in terms of quarters. So if you walk in and you say, I need a slab that's an inch and a half, a lot of mills are snobby and jerks and they'll laugh at you. So you just go in and say, I need a 6/4 slab. But anyways, took that and started milling it down. And like, here's a couple of the pieces. I was able to get it down to just over an inch. It was about an inch and a 1/16, which is great because my blade that I cut it down with is a 1/16. So when I sliced it in half, slice the width of it in half, I end up with 2 1/2-inch pieces. So
Nice.
out of this one slab from the tree in our front yard, I'm going to be able to make 2 cajons. So I'm just getting the milling stuff done now to get my parts and pieces. But I did some design work and drafted up some kind of rough concept drawings. And the other thing I noticed was that nobody has seemed to pay any attention to other industries and what they do with their products that could have an effect on this. So for instance, manufacturers of high-end audio equipment for vehicles, they make subwoofers. And you don't just put a subwoofer in the car. It has to go in a box. And that's because that box helps to improve and amplify the sound of the bass. Nobody's really paid any attention to that. So I did a lot of research into different sub boxes to see how they're constructed, learn some of the mathematics behind it, things like hole placement. And also you'll notice that on all of those, the hole to let the sound out, it is, well, it's not really let the sound out, to let the air out as air moves.
Yeah.
Because that frequency travels in all directions. It doesn't matter where your subwoofer speaker is pointed. It moves all directions. But if you look at those boxes, those holes for the air, they're actually sculpted and fluted. So I'm going to be doing some of that with this. I'm going to play around with hole placement a little bit to see how that affects the sound, size as well, and stuff like that. And once I get some of these made, I've got some local friends that play, and I'm just going to get them in their hands and say, hey, go test drive these for me. Try them out, see what you think. Tell me, give me your feedback so I can just kind of keep tweaking. So this is something we'll probably come back to from time to time, because it's in between my, commissioned work that I'm doing this. So I'll have to set it aside here when I get back from vacation, because I've got other, client projects that I have to jump on. So, but it's going to be interesting. This is really my first pretty large scale, prototype process like this.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, once you get into that realm of musical instruments, it's a different world. And I don't know, I always see those like kits where you make your own ukulele or guitar, and it's always like, oh, that would be fun, one day. And it's like, no, I don't have enough time to play the instruments I've got, let alone make one. But like most things, it's always like, oh yeah, I wonder, like, it'd be fun to make it, rather than do the actual thing you do, make, do all the stuff around the thing that you want to actually do. But no, that's super interesting. It was funny you mentioned amplifiers and subwoofers and things like that. And because I recently bought that sewing machine, and the cover it comes in is like a nice wooden cover, and it's been covered in a vinyl kind of thing. And I've been thinking about redoing that. And the one my idea went to, the coverings that you put on amplifiers, that fake leather kind of textured stuff. I've been starting to go down that rabbit hole of, maybe if I bought some of that and recoated this cover in that. So it's interesting how everything kind of relates back to these weird things. But no, that's super interesting. I mean, what kind of joints are you going to do? Is it going to be kind of just lap joints, or Like, what kind of genre are you thinking?
No, I
Or
think
finger joint?
I'm gonna do some dovetail
Okay.
joinery on the corners of the box, and then I'll do a rabbet around the back to
Okay.
mount the back plate. Um, and then the front, the tamba gets screwed on
Okay.
to the front, because that's a part that needs to be replaced from time to time.
Yep.
And they're they're generally a plywood. The
Yep.
tamba is, and so looking at some other instrument building, like with guitars, violins, stringed instruments like that. Um, I learned a lot about that construction, and so what I think I'm going to do for my tamba is I'm going to get a bunch of scrap veneer.
Yep.
The thinnest I can get, the better.
Yep.
And I'm going to create my own plywood to get a really quality sound out of that tamba. And then what I want to do is also try to create a fiberglass tamba
Okay.
for it as
Yep.
well, because the fiberglass doesn't give you as rich and warm of a tone, but it gives you louder tone.
Okay.
So my idea is to have one instrument that you can take to a gig where you're not able to amplify, the cajon. It
Yep.
just is an acoustic instrument. And you can put the fiberglass tamba on for that and have greater volume. Or if you're playing a venue or you're in a recording studio where you're able to mic and amplify the instrument, then you can put on this plywood tamba to have a higher quality tone.
Hmm. Nice. That's super interesting. So, and then I guess you just can put generic guitar strings at the back behind it, or
Yeah, my goal is to just like the wood I'm going to use is to use recycled guitar strings.
yep.
I've got some. Well, I need to do some restringing on my guitars, anyways, and I think I have an old set still laying around too. But I'm going to play around with the gauge of the strings as well to see, what's there, how that changes the snare effect. It's funny, like there has been some like innovation and change in this instrument very recently,
Yep.
but all the manufacturers are just putting useless toys on them. Like
Yep.
instead of really focusing on a quality instrument, they're just putting more bells and whistles on. Like they make ones that you can engage and disengage the
Yep.
the strings, so you can have basically a Peruvian cajon or a flamenco cajon.
Yep.
Um,
Basically the
and
same as a
it's like,
snare drum mechanism.
yeah, some of them actually do use the coils that you'd use on a snare drum. Guitar strings are the more traditional way to do it. Um, but yeah, it's kind of like if you ever watch people who review the new guitars that come out that are like, you only need one guitar for the rest of your life, you can use this for everything, it's an all-around guitar. And every single time somebody reviews one of those, honestly,
Yeah.
they're not getting paid to review it, they're like, yeah, it's fun, like it's a great gimmick for around the
Yeah.
house, but I would never play this on a gig, it sounds like crap.
Yeah. Yeah. It does everything poorly. Nothing
Yeah,
well.
does a lot of stuff really poorly, but it doesn't do anything well.
Yep.
And that's kind of where the market's at with these. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make an instrument that plays really well.
Yeah. And I'm sure it'll look good too.
Hopefully.
I have
But
no
do your
doubt.
job, right?
While we're on the topic of guitar strings, I have to tell you about this YouTube channel. There's this guy, I think he's in Europe somewhere, and he buys these old pianos and he restrings pianos. And so the first time he did it with guitar strings. And so you get this like super unreal tonal sound coming out of it, especially like in like the higher registers, it doesn't really work. But once you go into those middle and lower registers, it sounds, it just sounds absolutely weird. And then he did it again with fishing line, which, I think he had a mental breakdown of that, trying to retune it because it just immediately go out of tune. But that sounded so cool as well. Yeah, and then he did it again on a grand piano. He put bass strings on, and yeah, if you want to see musical instrument abuse, go check out that. But it sounds absolutely fascinating. And he actually gets like professional tuner to come in and kind of like, here, come fix my piano. It's sounding weird. And they're just like, what's going on here? So yeah, it was funny because I was just recently getting my piano tuned and I was speaking to the tuner about it. And yeah, she was having a good laugh about that. Oh yeah, no, the best one though was he replaced, the felt hammers. He actually replaced them with metal hammers. He found these really super light metal hammers, and he's sitting there just trying to get it as hard as he can to see if it's actually going to snap the strings. And actually, it sounded very much like a harpsichord, but it made the keys like obviously super heavy because it's a hammer in there. But yeah, YouTube, what would we do without you?
That's awesome. It's funny because Katie, my wife, and I were talking yesterday about that kind of experimentation that we haven't, to a large degree, we haven't been able to do here in life. We haven't been able to do that, for the last year, just to experiment and try different things and go have these experiences for the sake of the experience. Because it may not turn into anything, but you never know what it's going to affect down the road. And I do that all the time in my shop. Like if I have a spare minute, I tinker with stuff and I get these ideas out of my head that, this project may never come to fruition itself, but I never know when those things are going to come back in on a different project. Like, oh, you know what? I tried this one time. I think that would fit really cool in this project. That's a really, really important thing to do. And I think a lot of people get deterred from doing that because they feel like what they've done is a failure. Like this didn't become a sellable thing, or it didn't become, my next big breakthrough immediately. So they shy away from that. And I encourage people all the time to just try, try something, see what it is, see what it's about, see what you like about it, what you don't, and just learn from it. Like have fun playing around and experiment.
And don't feel, I think the secret as well is don't feel bad if you just got to throw it out. It's not, or put it away. Like it's not everything's supposed to succeed. And if you get this mindset that everything has to be a success, it will hold you back. If you're able to just be like, look, I tried, didn't work. I've been working on some medieval costumes and I picked up some linen that was probably a little thin. And as I was making, I'm like, I don't think this is going to work. But I was like, oh, well, whatever. And I almost finished it and it was too small and it didn't work. And it's like, yep, now it just goes in the scrap bin and I'm sure I'll use that fabric. But in doing that, I refined my skills. I learned what not to do. And even though I kind of started knowing that that's kind of what was going to happen, and it's always disappointing throwing something out that you've been working on, but it's part of the process. And once you kind of accept that as part of the process, that experimentation and that testing becomes a much more rich experience rather than going, oh, I'm just wasting my time, I'm going to throw this out anyway. You start to go, well, I'm going to throw it out, so let's try, let's see what actually happens. And it's a very different process to, nothing to me is more nerve-wracking than having something, almost finished. It's all painted up, and you're ready, and you just need to do that final thing. And you're like, oh, what happens if I mess it up? Well, I love that initial start of the process where you're still hammering it together and getting it to shape. And if it doesn't work, you can pull it apart and remake it and put it back together. And once you've invested all that time, it becomes a much more stressful process. But yeah, that initial prototyping is, oh man, that's the best time.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to see if I've got this fantastic failure around here still. And I don't know what the heck I did with it, but I played around after I made my kerfing plane. I played around with the idea of weaving some wood, making I mean, it's basically basket making.
Yeah.
But I took a piece of wood and ran my kerf plane over it to create a nice little kerf. And then I cut a bunch of strips of wood the same thickness as that kerf. And then the other thing I wanted to try with this was I have a rainbow of RIT clothes dye.
Okay. Yep.
Like I literally bought a rainbow of it, like Roy G. Biv of RIT clothes dye, and I was like, I want to see how well this works on this wood. So I dyed some of the 16th inch strips that I cut, different colors, and I just started slotting them into this kerf and then weaving the other ones in and creating, you know, a checkerboard kind of pattern with it. And you know, at the time I was kind of thinking like maybe I'll do this in some boxes, like jewelry boxes or, you know, music boxes. I think this could work really well. And I mean, it was also partially just because I wanted to play around with my kerfing plane and get some stuff dialed in. And so I have just this one stick with, you know, a little bit of weave above it. And it's not going to do anything. Like that is not going to be a project in and of itself.
Yeah.
But just in doing that, I tuned in my kerfing plane and made some changes and stuff to that to make it a much better tool. I figured out that this particular kind of wood I was using, when it is thin, bends really well even without steaming, and I can do a weave. I found out that RIT closed dye works really freaking good on this wood, and that if I do a clear coat over it, it doesn't make the closed dye bleed. So I learned a ton from this one stupid little like 4x6 piece of weaved wood.
Yep. Just asking, what if I did that? What if I did that?
Yeah.
No. Oh, it's always good. It's always good to experiment. I need to do more of it, but
I think the weaving actually may come into play here in the not too distant future. I have a client that wants to do some flower boxes, like floor standing flower boxes, and she saw the pictures I put up of that little trial and stuff, and she was like, I think that would be really nice. So it may end up being something I do. We'll just see.
Oh, that's good. All right. Well, now we get to the business side of the podcast, and I guess where can people find you, Chili?
Yes, go check me out on my website, orwoodsolutions.com, or you can find me on social media. I have a YouTube channel, which is Orwood Solutions, as well as my Facebook, which is Orwood Solutions, and Instagram, Orwood CS. How about you?
Awesome. You can find me at Crafty Beetroot on YouTube mainly, and then also craftybeetroot.com. For more information on the podcast, check out what's on your workbench. .podbean.com, and you should be able to find this podcast wherever you find podcasts: Apple, Amazon, Spotify, all of those good places. So with that, we will catch up next week to find out what's on your workbench.